Okay, let's unpack this. Starting a new venture is, well, it's exhilarating. You've got the idea, you've got the energy, maybe you've even picked out the name. But before you do anything else, before you hire anyone or sign a single client, you have to build the foundation, the legal identity of your business here in the UK. This deep dive is for you. If you're a founder or just thinking about it, you need to understand the blueprint before the building starts.
That blueprint is absolutely critical, and it's so much more than just, filling out a form online.
Mhm.
We're focusing on UK company registration today, and we're really aiming to give you clarity on the trickier areas, the bits that often trip people up. We're going beyond the basics.
Exactly. Our source material lays out these core legal concepts, and our mission today is to get a really clear, structured understanding of three specific things. First, the heavy duties and maybe surprising risks that the people setting up the company, the so-called promoters, actually carry. Second, we need to get a handle on the rules for business deals made before the company is even legally registered. That's a huge one. And third, we'll break down the major administrative differences between setting up a public limited company versus a private one.
And knowing those three pillars, that's what makes sure your legal foundation is solid from day one. It lets you focus on the business, not on fighting fires from early mistakes.
Right. So let's start at the very beginning. I mean, before the company's even an official thing, we're talking about the company's architects, the promoters. These are the people who are, organizing the money, finding the first office, drafting the paperwork. They're acting for something that legally doesn't exist yet.
And that role is completely unique, and it carries just a profound legal weight. It immediately brings up the concept of the duties of promoters because they're in a position of control, right? They're controlling the initial capital, the structure. So they're held to these very strict fiduciary obligations.
Okay, hold on. Fiduciary obligations. That's a term we hear a lot in business law. Can we just break that down? What does it practically mean for that promoter?
Yeah, of course. It means they have to operate with, well, the highest standards of trust and good faith. They have to put the interests of the future company and its future shareholders way above their own. The classic trap here is self-dealing or undisclosed profits.
Instant.
So say a promoter buys a piece of land for £50,000. Then, once the company is up and running, they sell that same land to their new company for $100,000. That is the clear breach of duty. Unless, and this is the key part, unless that profit was completely disclosed to an independent board or all the shareholders.
And what if they don't disclose it? What's the real-world consequence?
The consequences can be really severe. The company, once it's formed, can actually sue to rescind the contract, which means it gets its money back. Or it can force the promoter to just hand over that secret profit they made. The law is very strict here to protect that initial pot of money.
So the duty is heavy. But what about the other side of it? The risk. What happens if the promoter is signing deals during this pre-incorporation phase? That brings us to the liabilities of promoters.
And this is where the personal risk really ramps up. Because the company doesn't have a corporate identity yet. It's not a legal person. It can't sign things or take on debt. So the promoters themselves often bear that personal responsibility. If they take out a loan, they're the ones legally on the hook.
So that dual identity creator on one hand and temporary agent who is personally liable on the other, that's the key aha moment for our listener here.
Absolutely.
The person funding the startup isn't just an administrator. They are personally vulnerable until that company gets its official birth certificate from Companies House.
Exactly. Think of it this way. The law basically sees the promoter as stepping in. They hold the contract personally, just for a while, until the legal entity can be born and take it over. But, and this is the big but, that handover process isn't automatic, which leads us perfectly to our next point.
That's a perfect transition. So the liability is personal. But what happens with formal contracts? Let's say a promoter, we'll call her Jane, finds the perfect office. She's worried she'll lose it. So she signs a 12-month lease on behalf of Future Tech PLC, even though that company isn't incorporated yet. Here's where it gets really interesting. Who is actually bound by that lease?
This gets us right into the knotty rules for pre-incorporation contracts in the UK. And the core legal principle is, well, it's definite. A company cannot, as a matter of law, be bound by a contract that was made before it existed.
Right.
Jane was signing for something that didn't exist. And a non-existent entity can't authorize an agent. It can't accept liability.
That makes perfect logical sense, I guess. You can't have a contract with a ghost. But that creates huge practical problems for a business, doesn't it? Every startup needs things ready to go from day one.
Precisely. And this is what leads to some severe implications for the promoter. Even if Jane very clearly signed it, Jane Smith on behalf of FormationThe PLC, the promoter, Jane, is deemed to be personally liable under that contract.
So if FormationThe PLC never gets off the ground, or it does, but decides the office is too pricey and just walks away, Jane is personally stuck with that entire 12-month lease.
Yes, it could be financial ruin, absolutely. Which is why this area demands so much forethought. What's fascinating here is the legal gymnastics you need to do to transition these contracts smoothly. Once the company is registered, it can't just ratify that old contract.
Wait, why not? Why can't the new board just say, yep, we retroactively approve Jane's lease signing?
Because ratification works on the principle that the agent, Jane, was authorized by the principal, the company, when she signed.
But the principal didn't exist.
Exactly. So authorization was impossible. To get around this, the company has to enter into a totally new, separate agreement with the landlord. The technical term is novation, or they can just drop a brand new contract on identical terms.
So novation isn't just a fancy legal word. It's a critical step where all three parties, the promoter, the third party, and the new company, have to agree to swap the promoter out and put the company in.
And it requires the landlord, in this case, to actively cooperate, which they might not want to do if the company already seems a bit shaky. It just stresses the practical relevance for you, the listener. If you have to sign something early, you have to structure that agreement to manage your personal risk from the start.
Okay, that really clarifies the choppy waters of early deals. So moving from those early risks to the final administrative steps, making it official, the actual process of incorporation is fundamentally different depending on the type of company you're forming.
Absolutely. You have to distinguish between the two core types: a public company, a PLC, and a private company, an LTD. They are not interchangeable. And that choice dictates the whole administrative path you have to follow.
We hear PLC and LTD all the time, but let's really get into the weeds. What are the key systematic differences in the administrative requirements for forming them in the UK?
Okay, let's start with the private limited company, the LTD. This is the one most startups and small businesses will choose. Its requirements are really designed for simplicity. You need a minimum of one director, and there's no statutory minimum capital you need before you can start trading. The filing with Companies House is less detailed. It reflects its private nature.
So that sounds like the go-to path for speed and flexibility. Now, what about the public limited company, the PLC?
The requirements for a PLC are exponentially more rigorous. A PLC is designed to raise money from the public by selling shares, so it's under much stricter rules. First, you need at least 2 directors. But the big one, the crucial difference, is that a PLC has to satisfy minimum share capital requirements before it's even allowed to trade.
Can we put a number on that just to make it tangible?
Yeah. To get a trading certificate, a PLC has to have a minimum allotted share capital of £50,000. And at least a quarter of that, so £12,500, has to be actually paid up, cash in the bank, before the company can start doing any business. That is a massive administrative hurdle that a private company just doesn't have.
A huge difference. And on top of the capital and the 2 directors, I know a PLC needs a qualified company secretary. Why is that specific role mandatory for a PLC?
It goes back to that idea of accountability. When you're dealing with public money, the standards are higher. The company secretary's job is all about governance. They make sure the company is following all the complex rules, meeting deadlines, documenting board meetings. If we connect this to the bigger picture, all these extra requirements are there to protect public investors.
So the heavier administrative load for the PLC, the secretary, the directors, the minimum capital, it's essentially a government-mandated promise of transparency to anyone who might buy their shares.
That's it, exactly. The private route is built for founder control and simplicity. The public route is built for raising large amounts of capital, but it demands full regulatory transparency right from day one. 2 totally different paths.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner, today? We've covered 3 foundational pillars. We've established the critical, high-risk role of the promoter, who carries these really stringent duties and personal liabilities for things they do early on.
And we navigated the pitfalls of those pre-incorporation contracts. We stressed why the company can't just ratify them and why you absolutely need a proper novation to get the promoter off the hook.
And finally, we detailed that administrative split, showing that the path to legal existence is just dramatically different depending on whether you choose the nimble LTD or the highly regulated PLC. This structured knowledge gives you the foundation to navigate these steps without getting overwhelmed.
It lets you anticipate the legal friction points. You can see the moment a promoter's duty might be breached or a contract might expose them, and you can plan to prevent it.
It's about knowing not just how to register, but why all these rules exist in the first place.
It gives you the power to choose the right legal vehicle for your ambitions.
And that leads us to our final provocative thought for you to think about on your own. Given these very distinct administrative requirements for public and private companies, especially that minimum capital floor for PLCs, how might that initial choice made by a promoter on day one legally constrain the company's ability to pivot its business model or source crucial scale-up capital 5 years down the line? Think about the real cost and effort involved in trying to convert from one type to the other once you're already a mature business.